The world around you continues in motion, cars pass by, lights turn on and off, people follow their paths. But here, in this moment, I invite you to a different kind of pause. There's a story that needs to be told. A narrative about creatures so small they fit in the palm of your hand, but whose silent work sustains the very possibility of life as we know it. Perhaps you've already heard their hum without truly understanding what it means. We'll discover together that behind the obvious lies the extraordinary, and that some of the most powerful forces on the planet operate on a scale almost invisible to our eyes. I want to take you to an extraordinary discovery, a revelation that will forever change the way you see the world around you. It's a story about creatures so small they fit in the palm of your hand, but whose importance is so vast that without them, our own existence would be impossible. It's a narrative about bees, but not as you ever imagined knowing them. Imagine for a moment that you could shrink to the size of a sunflower seed and walk through a garden on a spring morning. What would you see? What would you feel? Each flower would become a cathedral of colors and fragrances, each petal a landing strip elaborately designed by nature. And then you would notice something extraordinary, a silent ballet happening around you, an ancestral dance between flowers and bees that is, literally, the choreography of life. Have you ever stopped to wonder why we exist? Why life has flourished so abundantly and diversely on this small blue planet lost in the cosmic immensity? The answer, my dear listener, is buzzing right beside us in every garden, in every field, in every flower bed we encounter on our way. These are not just small insects that produce honey. They are the invisible architects of abundance, the silent engineers who designed and maintained the foundations of life as we know it. They are the guardians of a secret that humanity took millennia to fully understand, the secret of universal interdependence. Tonight, or in this moment when we meet, I invite you to embark with me on a journey that goes far beyond the surface. We'll unravel mysteries that are hidden in plain sight. We'll discover how creatures that weigh less than a paper clip sustain entire ecosystems, and how the beating of their small wings can determine whether or not we'll have food on our table tomorrow. Prepare to see the world with new eyes, to understand connections that have always existed but perhaps you've never noticed. Prepare to discover that, in fact, we are all part of a cosmic symphony where each note has its role, and where bees are the discreet conductors who keep the entire orchestra in harmony. Close your eyes for a moment and listen. Can you hear it? That soft sound, almost imperceptible, that seems to come from all directions at once? It's the hum of life happening, the constant whisper of millions of small wings cutting through the air with a purpose that transcends our immediate understanding. The hum of a bee is not just the sound its wings make when they beat up to 230 times per second. It's the soundtrack of life's continuity, the background music of a process that began more than 100 million years ago, when the first flowers bloomed on Earth and needed to find a way to reproduce. Imagine with me, 100 million years ago, our planet was very different. Dinosaurs walked the Earth, continents had completely different shapes, and the climate was warmer and more humid. It was during this time that something revolutionary happened in the plant kingdom. Plants, which until then depended mainly on wind and water to spread their pollen, began to develop a completely new strategy: seduction. The flowers we know today are, essentially, nature's advertising billboards. Their vibrant colors, their intoxicating fragrances, their elaborate shapes, all of this was carefully designed over millions of years to attract pollinating insects. And among all these insects, bees became the most efficient and reliable partners of flowering plants. Have you ever wondered why bees are so attracted to flowers? The answer goes far beyond the simple search for nectar. Bees and flowers developed a symbiotic relationship so perfect that it's almost as if they were made for each other. And, in a way, they were. Over millions of years of evolution, flowers learned to speak the language of bees. They developed colors that bees can see, shades of blue, purple, and ultraviolet that are invisible to our human eyes. They created intricate patterns on their petals that function as landing strips for these small aviators. They produce specific fragrances that act as irresistible calls through the air. And bees, in turn, molded their bodies and behaviors to become perfect collectors. They developed branched hairs that capture pollen like small living brushes. They created specialized structures on their legs, the corbiculae or pollen baskets, where they can carry loads that reach half their own body weight. But perhaps the most fascinating thing is understanding that this partnership doesn't just benefit bees and flowers. It's the engine that drives all terrestrial life diversity. Every time a bee visits a flower, she's not just collecting food for her hive. She's ensuring that plant can reproduce, that new plants can be born, that fruits can form, that seeds can germinate. And when fruits form and seeds germinate, an entire food chain is fed. Birds eat the fruits and spread the seeds. Mammals feed on the plants and fruits. Herbivorous insects find food in the leaves. Predators feed on the herbivores. And so, the simple act of a bee visiting a flower multiplies into waves of life that spread throughout the entire ecosystem. It's as if each bee carried with her an invisible magic wand, and each touch of that wand on a flower unleashed a miracle of creation and abundance. Have you ever thought about this? That perhaps the true magicians of our world are not fairy tale characters, but small golden creatures who work tirelessly, without rest, transforming the world one flower at a time? Now, I want you to imagine a city. Not just any city, but the most efficient, most organized, and most sustainable city that has ever existed. A city where there's no waste, where each inhabitant knows exactly their function, where cooperation is so perfect that the entire system functions as a single living organism. This city exists, my dear listener, and it's closer to you than you imagine. It's the beehive, a miniature metropolis that houses between 20,000 and 80,000 inhabitants, all working in a harmony that would make the most talented human urban planners envious. But the hive is not just a house for bees. It's a masterpiece of engineering that reveals fundamental secrets about efficiency, social organization, and sustainability. Did you know that honeycombs have a hexagonal shape, not by chance, but because this is geometrically the most efficient way to divide space? Mathematicians took centuries to prove what bees already knew instinctively, that regular hexagons allow storing the greatest amount of honey using the least amount of wax possible. It's a perfect example of how nature solves complex problems with elegance and precision. Each hexagonal cell of the comb is built with a precision that would impress any architect. The walls are exactly 0.073 millimeters thick, no more, no less. The angle of the cells is tilted at precise 13 degrees to prevent honey from dripping out. And most fascinating, bees build these perfect structures in total darkness, using only touch and a geometric sense that seems to transcend any rational explanation. But the architecture of the hive goes far beyond the geometry of the combs. It's a natural ventilation system that maintains the internal temperature constant between 34 and 36 degrees Celsius, regardless of external weather. In summer, specialized bees position themselves at the hive entrance and beat their wings to create air currents that cool the interior. In winter, they group together in specific formations and contract their flight muscles to generate heat, keeping the hive warm like a living central heating system. The hive is also a sophisticated chemical laboratory. Bees produce propolis, a substance with antibacterial and antifungal properties that keeps the entire hive sterilized. They control air humidity to preserve honey, and have developed food conservation techniques that allow storing energy for months, ensuring the colony's survival during periods of scarcity. And what about social organization? In a hive, each bee has a specific function that changes throughout her life. In the first days, she's a house bee, cleaning cells and caring for larvae. Later, she becomes a builder, producing wax and constructing combs. Then, she may specialize as a guard, protecting the hive entrance, or as a ventilator, maintaining adequate temperature. Finally, in the last weeks of her life, she becomes a forager, the most dangerous and important function. This is when she goes out to explore the external world, locate sources of nectar and pollen, and communicate her discoveries to the rest of the hive through a complex dance that is literally a spatial language. Have you ever wondered how bees manage to communicate? They developed a communication system as sophisticated as any human language. When a forager bee finds a rich source of nectar, she returns to the hive and performs a specific dance on the combs. The angle of the dance indicates direction relative to the sun, The duration of the dance reveals distance. The intensity of movement communicates the quality of the food source. It's as if each bee were a living librarian, cataloging information about the external world and sharing this knowledge precisely and efficiently. Within minutes of a discovery, hundreds of bees can be flying toward a new food source, all following the precise coordinates communicated by their explorer companions' dance. This communication capacity is not just impressive, it's fundamental to the ecological role of bees. It allows a single hive to monitor and pollinate an area up to 8 kilometers in radius, coordinating the work of tens of thousands of individuals in a military precision operation. Breathe deeply with me and imagine you're floating gently over a flowering meadow on a spring morning. Dew still glistens on petals like small diamonds, and the first rays of sun begin to warm the air. It's in this magical moment that we witness one of nature's most important and beautiful spectacles, the beginning of the bee's daily journey. A forager bee doesn't simply fly randomly in search of flowers. Her journey is carefully planned, economically calculated, and ecologically essential. When she leaves the safety of her hive and launches into the morning air, she's carrying with her more than just the instinct to seek food. She carries the responsibility for life's continuity. Observe how she flies. It's not an erratic or casual flight. A forager bee can visit between 500 and 1,500 flowers in a single trip, following optimized routes that minimize energy expenditure and maximize resource collection. She has learned, through generations of natural selection, to read the landscape like a three-dimensional map of opportunities. Each flower she visits is a station on an epic journey. When she lands delicately on a flower, something extraordinary happens. Her branched hairs, electrically charged by flight friction, attract pollen grains like small magnets. While she moves inside the flower, collecting nectar with her long, flexible tongue, hundreds of pollen grains adhere to her furry body. But here's the miracle. When she visits the next flower of the same species, some of these pollen grains transfer to that new flower's stigma, completing the pollination process. It's an intimate encounter between male and female plants that may be separated by kilometers of distance, an encounter made possible by the bee who serves as nature's unconscious Cupid. Have you ever imagined how many plant species depend exclusively on bees for their reproduction? The number is impressive. More than 70% of the world's flowering plants depend on pollinators, and bees are responsible for about 80% of this pollination. This means that 4 out of 5 flowering plants you see around you only exist because bees help them reproduce. Think about the apples you eat, the almonds you savor, the coffee you drink in the morning. Think about sweet strawberries, Halloween pumpkins, sunflowers that follow the sun. All of them exist because bees visited their ancestral flowers, carrying life from one plant to another in an uninterrupted chain extending millions of years. But bees' contribution goes far beyond plants that produce fruits we consume directly. They pollinate forage plants that feed livestock that produces our meat and milk. They pollinate plants that produce seeds that feed birds that, in turn, control insect populations that would otherwise devastate our crops. It's a network of connections so complex and interconnected that it challenges our capacity for total understanding. Each bee flying through your garden is participating in a natural economic system worth trillions of dollars in ecosystem services. If we had to pay to artificially do what bees do for free, the cost would be literally incalculable. And the most beautiful thing about all this is that bees do this vital work not out of conscious altruism but simply by living their lives, following their ancestral instincts, seeking the food they need to sustain their hives. It's as if nature designed a system where each species' self-interest automatically benefits the entire whole. While the bee collects nectar to produce honey that will feed her colony during winter, she simultaneously ensures that plants reproduce, that new fruits form, that new seeds germinate, that new habitats are created for countless other species. It's living proof that, in nature, collaboration and competition are not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a larger system that promotes life in all its diversity. Have you ever thought about what the world would be like without this daily dance between bees and flowers? What would a planet be like where plants couldn't reproduce efficiently, where floral diversity was drastically reduced, where entire food chains collapsed? Now, I invite you to further reduce your perspective and imagine you're inside a bee's body, traveling through her internal systems like a microscopic explorer. What you would discover is that each bee is literally a flying chemical laboratory, equipped with biological technologies that make our most advanced human inventions seem primitive. Start with the digestive system. When a bee collects nectar, she doesn't simply swallow it as we do with our food. The nectar is stored in a special organ called the honey stomach or crop, a compartment separate from the digestive stomach, where extraordinary chemical transformations begin to happen. Inside this honey stomach, specialized enzymes immediately begin breaking down complex sugars in nectar into simpler sugars. It's the first step in the alchemy that will transform a perishable liquid into honey, a food that can be preserved indefinitely. Archaeologists have found honey pots in 3,000-year-old Egyptian tombs that were still perfectly edible. But the bee is more than a honey factory. She's also a walking sensor, capable of detecting electric fields from flowers. Minimal changes in air humidity, variations in nectar chemical composition, and even seismic vibrations transmitted through soil and plants. Her compound eyes, formed by thousands of individual units called ommatidia, can detect polarization of sunlight even on cloudy days, allowing her to navigate with astronomical precision. She sees colors that are invisible to us, including ultraviolet patterns on flowers that function as landing strips, specially designed to guide pollinators. Her antennae are mobile chemical laboratories, capable of detecting and identifying hundreds of different chemical compounds at concentrations so low that our most sensitive instruments have difficulty measuring them. A bee can identify the chemical signature of her own hive among thousands of others, recognize individuals from her family, and detect the presence of diseases or threats through smell. And what about her flight capacity? A bee beats her wings about 230 times per second, creating air vortices that generate lift in a way that aeronautical engineers still don't completely understand. According to basic laws of aerodynamics, a bee shouldn't be able to fly. Her wings are too small for her relatively heavy body. But she flies, and flies with energy efficiency that surpasses any human aircraft. During flight, she carries not only her own weight, but also loads of nectar and pollen that can represent up to half her body mass. It's as if a human helicopter could fly carrying another helicopter of the same size, a feat that defies our understanding of physics and engineering. Inside her hive, the bee's abilities manifest in even more surprising ways. They produce wax through special glands in the abdomen, secreting wax scales that are then chewed and molded to build perfectly geometric hexagonal combs. The process is so precise that cell wall thickness varies less than 0.002 millimeters throughout the entire structure. Worker bees also produce propolis, a resinous substance collected from tree buds and bark that is processed and chemically modified to create a material with antibiotic, antifungal, and antiviral properties. Propolis is used to seal cracks in the hive, mummify dead invaders, and create a sterile barrier that protects the entire colony from diseases. Nurse bees secrete royal jelly from special glands in their heads. This extraordinary substance, rich in proteins, vitamins, and hormones, is capable of transforming a common larva into a queen, an impressive example of how nutrition can completely alter an organism's genetic destiny. And all these chemical and physical operations happen in a body that weighs less than 0.1 grams and is only about 1.5 centimeters long. It's as if nature managed to compress all the technology of a modern chemical factory into a peanut-sized package, and on top of that, give this factory the ability to fly, navigate, communicate, and work as a team. Have you ever stopped to consider that each bee buzzing past you is literally a bioengineering miracle? That she represents millions of years of evolutionary refinement, optimization, and perfection? That concentrated in her small body are solutions to problems our best scientists are still trying to solve? Now, I invite you to travel with me through time, to witness the long love story between bees and flowers that shaped the face of the earth. Imagine we possess a time machine and can observe how this extraordinary partnership developed over millions of years, transforming sterile landscapes into exuberant gardens of life. 130 million years ago, during the Cretaceous period, Earth was a very different place. Dinosaurs dominated the landscape, but something even more revolutionary was happening in the plant kingdom. The first true flowers were emerging, and with them arose a new form of reproduction that would forever change terrestrial biology. Before flowers, plant reproduction depended mainly on wind and water, effective but wasteful methods. Wind spreads pollen indiscriminately, hoping some grains will be lucky enough to find a receptive plant of the same species. It's like trying to hit a specific target by shooting arrows randomly in the dark. Flowers represented a revolution instead of wasting energy, producing enormous amounts of pollen hoping some particles would find their destination. Plants began to hire animals to make targeted and efficient deliveries. And among all candidates for nature's postal workers, bees proved to be the most competent and reliable. The partnership didn't develop overnight. It was a long and gradual process of coevolution, where plants and bees shaped each other over millions of generations. Flowers that offered better rewards, sweeter nectar, more nutritious pollen attracted more bees. Bees that were more efficient at collecting, who could carry more pollen, travel greater distances, locate flowers more quickly, had more success feeding their colonies. During this long process, something magical happened. Flowers began to specialize, developing specific shapes, colors, fragrances, and rewards to attract their favorite pollinators. Some flowers became true beauty salons for bees, offering not just food, but also special fragrances that male bees collected to attract mates. Other plants developed flowers with shapes that required specific collection techniques, creating a kind of lock that could only be opened by bees with the correct behavioral key. Some flowers even develop mechanisms that ensure the visiting bee is covered with pollen in a specific way, transforming each pollinator into a highly specialized living brush. Have you ever closely observed the extraordinary diversity of floral forms? Some flowers are shallow and open, facilitating access for short-tongued bees. Others are deep and tubular, accessible only to long-tongued bees. Some have elaborate landing platforms, others have trigger mechanisms that explode pollen onto the visiting bee. This floral diversification, driven by coevolution with pollinators, is one of the main reasons for the extraordinary diversity of terrestrial life. Today, there are more than 400,000 species of flowering plants in the world, more than half of all known plant species. And the vast majority of them exist thanks to their partnership with bees and other pollinators. But the story doesn't stop at flower diversification. The abundance of flowering plants created food resources that sustained the evolution of countless other species. More nutritious fruits fed the evolution of larger and more intelligent mammals. More efficient seeds allowed plants to colonize new environments. More elaborate leaves created microhabitats for a myriad of small organisms. It's fascinating to think that the landscape we see today, our lush forests, our flowering meadows, our colorful gardens, is largely a collaborative creation between plants and bees. Each fruit tree, each flowering shrub, each carpet of wildflowers is living witness to millions of years of evolutionary partnership. And this partnership continues evolving. Even today, botanists regularly discover new strategies that plants have developed to attract bees, and new behaviors that bees have developed to exploit floral resources. It's an evolutionary laboratory that never stops working, a collaborative work of art that's never finished. But perhaps the most profound aspect of this story is understanding that we humans are products of this same coevolution. Our own evolution was shaped by the abundance created by the partnership between bees and flowers. The fruits that fed our ancestors, the medicinal plants that cured us, the diverse environments that stimulated our intelligence, all of this exists because bees and flowers learned to work together to create life in abundance. Have you ever wondered if our aesthetic appreciation for flower beauty could be rooted in an ancestral evolutionary memory? If our natural tendency to protect and cultivate gardens could be an echo of millions of years living in landscapes shaped by collaboration between plants and pollinators, close your eyes and imagine you could see flows of energy and materials moving through the landscape like luminous rivers. You would see currents of nectar flowing from flowers to hives, streams of pollen transported from plant to plant, waves of nutrients circulating through entire ecosystems. What you would be witnessing is nature's invisible economy, an economic system more complex and efficient than any human market ever created. Bees are the main bankers and traders of this natural economy. They don't just collect resources, they transform them, store them, distribute them, and invest them in ways that generate compound returns for the entire biosphere. And the most extraordinary thing is they do this without causing inflation, recession, or system collapse. Let's examine the numbers of this economy. A single hive can house between 20,000 and 80,000 worker bees. During the active season, these bees can collectively visit more than 2 million flowers per day. In a single season, a hive can produce between 30 and 60 kilograms of honey and energy reserve that will allow the colony to survive during winter months when there are no flowers available. But these numbers, impressive as they are, represent only the domestic economy of bees. The true economic value of their work lies in the ecosystem services they provide free to the entire biosphere. Economists estimate that the value of pollination performed by bees and other pollinators is approximately $200 billion annually on a global scale. Think about it. $200 billion in services provided for free year after year without contracts, without salaries, without labor complaints. It's as if nature created the world's most efficient and dedicated workforce, working 24 hours a day throughout the entire growing season without ever asking for a raise or taking vacation. But even this astronomical number underestimates the true economic contribution of bees. Because pollination is not just a service, it's the fundamental investment that makes possible all agricultural production and biodiversity maintenance. Without bees, there would be no fruits to harvest, seeds to plant, or new plants to sustain ecosystems. Consider modern agriculture. About 35% of all global food production depends directly on insect pollination, and bees are responsible for most of this work. This includes not only obvious fruits like apples, pears, and strawberries, but also essential crops like almonds, sunflowers, canola, and even some varieties of coffee. Have you ever imagined what would happen if bees simply disappeared? It wouldn't just be a matter of not having honey to sweeten your tea. It would be a cascading collapse that would affect practically every aspect of our food economy. Prices of foods that depend on pollination would increase dramatically. Some foods would become so rare that only the very wealthy could buy them. But the impact would go far beyond human economy. Wild plants that depend on bees for reproduction would begin to disappear. This would affect animals that feed on these plants, which in turn would affect predators that feed on these animals. Entire food chains would collapse like dominoes falling in sequence. The bee economy also operates on temporal scales that transcend our immediate human perspective. When a bee pollinates a tree, she's not just ensuring this season's fruit production, she's investing in the next generation of trees that will produce fruit for decades or even centuries. It's a long-term investment that generates dividends for generations. And consider the energy efficiency of this natural economy. A bee uses approximately 1 teaspoon of honey as fuel to fly around the entire world. In terms of miles per gallon, a bee is more efficient than any vehicle we've ever built. And during this extraordinarily efficient journey, she performs work that benefits countless other species. The bee economy also knows no unemployment or waste. Every bee in the hive has a productive function, from the moment she emerges from the cell until the day of her death. Young bees start as cleaners and nurses, then become builders and guards, and finally specialize as foragers. It's an economy based on meritocracy and progressive specialization. And there's no waste in the bee economy. Everything is recycled, reused, or transformed into something useful. Old wax is melted and remolded. Dead bees are removed and composted to fertilize the environment around the hive. Even bee excrement serves as fertilizer for the plants they pollinate. But perhaps the most inspiring aspect of the bee economy is its sustainability. For more than 100 million years, bees have operated their economy without depleting resources, without contaminating the environment, without causing mass extinctions. On the contrary, their economic activity increases diversity and abundance of life around them. It's as if bees discovered the secret of true prosperity, an economic system where individual success automatically benefits the entire community. where the pursuit of profit, nectar and pollen, simultaneously enriches the entire ecosystem, where efficiency and sustainability are not conflicting objectives, but complementary aspects of the same strategy. Have you ever wondered what we could learn from the bee economy? What would our human society be like if we could create economic systems that, like bees, generated prosperity through collaboration, efficiency through specialization, and sustainability through respect for the natural cycles of life? Now I want to take you to understand one of the most subtle and profound functions of bees, their role as indicators of environmental health. They are like canaries in the coal mines of our planet organisms, so sensitive to environmental changes that their presence or absence tells us fundamental stories about the state of ecosystems around us. Imagine a bee as an ultra-sensitive biological sensor, capable of detecting changes in the environment that our most sophisticated instruments might miss. When a bee leaves her hive to forage, she's simultaneously collecting food and information about the quality of the world around her. Her antennae detect changes in air chemical composition. Her body absorbs pollutants present in nectar and pollen. Her behaviors reflect the availability and quality of floral resources. Her reproductive health indicates the presence of toxins in the environment. In essence, each bee is a walking biological weather station. When bee populations begin to decline in a region, this generally indicates that something fundamental is changing in the ecosystem. It might be the presence of pesticides that interfere with their navigation ability. It might be the loss of floral diversity that reduces the quality of their diet. It might be the presence of pathogens that spread when bees are stressed by environmental factors. Did you know that bees are capable of detecting electromagnetic radiation from cell towers and power lines? Studies show that artificial electromagnetic fields can interfere with their navigation ability, causing them to get lost or fly in erratic patterns. It's as if our modern technology is creating noise in the natural GPS system of bees. Bees are also extremely sensitive to climate change. They evolved to synchronize their life cycles with seasonal flowering patterns of plants. When global warming causes changes in flowering times, it can create a mismatch between when bees are active and when flowers are available. It's as if an entire orchestra became out of tune, not because individual musicians lost their ability, but because the tempo of the music changed and they can no longer play in harmony. This temporal mismatch can have devastating consequences for both bees and the plants that depend on them. But bees are not just passive indicators of environmental problems. They are also active agents of healing and ecological restoration. When an ecosystem is disturbed by fires, floods, or other natural catastrophes, bees are among the first organisms to recolonize the area, bringing with them pollen from distant plants and helping to accelerate the regeneration process. They are like itinerant gardeners sowing diversity wherever they fly. A single bee can carry pollen from dozens of different species in a single trip, creating opportunities for cross-fertilization between plants that might be geographically isolated. In urban environments, bees often thrive better than in the countryside, not because the city is naturally superior, but because diverse urban gardens generally contain a greater variety of flowering plants than agricultural monocultures. This teaches us something important about how we can create environments that support both bees and humans. Bees show us that environmental health is not just an aesthetic or sentimental issue, it's a question of systemic functioning. A healthy environment for bees is an environment that can sustain complex food webs, efficient nutrient cycles, and the diversity of life that makes ecosystems resilient to changes and disturbances. When we see abundant and active bees in an area, we can be confident that ecosystem is functioning well. Their presence indicates there's sufficient floral diversity, that pollution levels are within tolerable limits, that seasonal cycles are occurring predictably, and that the network of ecological relationships is intact. On the other hand, when bees begin to disappear from a region, it's an alarm signal we should take very seriously. It's as if the planet itself is sending us an urgent message about changes that need our attention and action. Have you ever noticed how many bees there are in your garden or the nearest park? Have you paid attention to whether they seem abundant and active, or if they're becoming rarer? These simple observations can provide us with valuable information about the health of our surrounding environment and our own future quality of life. There's something deeply disturbing happening in the world of bees, my dear listener. It's a silent transformation, almost imperceptible in daily life, but with implications so profound it could fundamentally alter the future of life on Earth. I want you to imagine the world as a complex symphony, where each species plays its part to create life's harmony. And now, imagine that one of the most important instruments in this cosmic orchestra is gradually losing its voice. In recent decades, scientists around the world have documented an alarming phenomenon known as colony collapse disorder or depopulation syndrome. Entire hives simply disappear. We don't find dead bees. They simply fly away and never return, leaving behind queens, larvae, and abandoned honey stores. It's as if worker bees, these tireless workers who dedicate their lives to the colony's welfare, suddenly lost the memory of the way home. Or perhaps it's more accurate to say they lost hope that there's still a home to return to. The causes of this phenomenon are multiple and interconnected, like a perfect storm of threats converging on these already overloaded creatures. Allow me to guide you through these threats, not to frighten you, but so we can understand the gravity of the situation and perhaps find paths to hope. First, we have pesticides, chemical substances designed to kill insects we consider pests, but which inevitably also affect beneficial insects. Neonicotinoids, a widely used class of pesticides, are particularly problematic for bees. They don't necessarily kill bees immediately, but affect their nervous system in subtle and devastating ways. Imagine a bee who has partially lost the ability to navigate, like an experienced pilot who suddenly can't read his airplane instruments anymore. She can fly, but can't find the way back home. She can recognize flowers, but can't effectively communicate their location to her sisters anymore. It's a cruel form of disorientation that transforms one of nature's most precise and organized creatures into a lost wanderer. Next, we have climate change, which alters seasonal patterns with which bees have synchronized their life cycles over millions of years. Warmer winters interrupt their dormancy periods. Early springs cause flowers to bloom before bees are active. Prolonged droughts reduce nectar production. More frequent storms interfere with their foraging activities. It's as if the cosmic clock that always guided bee life suddenly started running at a different speed, creating a mismatch between their evolutionary instincts and the reality of a rapidly changing world. Habitat loss is another critical threat. As forests are cut down, meadows are converted to monoculture fields, and natural environments are replaced by urban landscapes. Bees lose both the places where they nest and the diversity of plants they need for a balanced diet. Imagine if you were forced to survive eating only one type of food throughout your entire life. That's what happens to bees in large monoculture plantations. They have access to enormous amounts of nectar and pollen for a few weeks of the year, but are left without resources for the rest of the season. It's like living in a land of simultaneous feast and famine. Parasites and diseases are also spreading at alarming rates through bee populations. The Varroa destructor mite, appropriately named, feeds on bee hemolymph like a microscopic vampire, weakening bees and transmitting fatal viruses. Fungi like nosema cause intestinal infections that prevent bees from absorbing nutrients adequately. These pathogens spread especially rapidly when bees are stressed by other environmental factors. It's as if nature's immune system is being overloaded by multiple simultaneous threats, making entire populations vulnerable to diseases that would previously be controllable. And perhaps more subtly, but equally important, we have noise and electromagnetic pollution from our modern societies. Bees navigate using Earth's natural magnetic fields, and interference from cell towers, power lines, and other electronic equipment can disrupt their natural navigation systems. It's like trying to hear a whispered conversation at a rock concert. The electromagnetic noise of our civilization may be drowning out the natural signals bees use to navigate the world. Have you ever wondered what the world would be like if these trends continued? If bee populations continued to decline to the point of total collapse? It wouldn't just be a tragedy for the bees themselves. It would be an ecological disaster that would affect practically every aspect of life on Earth, including our own survival as a species. Breathe deeply and imagine with me a world that may be waiting for us if we don't act quickly to protect our bees. It's a difficult exercise, I know, but necessary, because only by fully understanding what we could lose will we find the motivation to preserve what we still have. Picture a spring morning, perhaps 20 or 30 years in the future. You wake up and go out to your garden, expecting to see and hear the familiar symphony of bees visiting your flowers. But there's only silence. The flowers are still there, hibiscus, roses, sunflowers, but they're strangely quiet, like an empty theater waiting for actors who never arrive. You go to the supermarket and notice that many products that were once common are now rare and expensive. Apples cost 10 times what they used to cost, and are small and inferior in taste because they had to be pollinated manually by human workers, using small brushes, a laborious and inefficient process that dramatically increases production costs. The nut section is almost empty. Almonds have become a luxury reserved only for the very wealthy. High-quality Arabica coffee has completely disappeared from the market, replaced by inferior varieties that can self-pollinate, but produce drinks with bitter taste and without the aromatic complexity we associated with good coffee. Strawberries, if you can find them, are small, hard, and without the sweet flavor you remember from childhood. Pumpkins for Halloween have become plastic decorations because real pumpkins are produced in such small quantities that they cost hundreds of dollars each. But the impact goes far beyond our dinner table. Natural landscapes have begun to change in fundamental ways. Meadows that were once colorful carpets of wildflowers are now dominated by just a few plant species that can reproduce without pollinator. Help mainly grasses and wind-pollinated plants, though diversity has plummeted in cascade. Without efficient bee pollination, many flowering plant species have gone extinct. Without these plants, animals that depended on them for food have also disappeared. Birds that fed on seeds and fruits have become rare. Small mammals that depended on nuts and berries have migrated or dramatically decreased in number. Entire forests have changed character. Many fruit trees can no longer reproduce effectively, being gradually replaced by wind-pollinated species. Forest structure becomes simpler, less diverse, less resilient to diseases and climate change. Ecosystems that were once complex webs of interdependencies have simplified into linear and fragile structures. Nature has lost much of its capacity to self-regulate and self-repair. Agricultural pests, which were once controlled by balanced ecosystems, now require even more intensive pesticide applications, creating a vicious cycle of environmental degradation. Agriculture has become an expensive and laborious process. Farmers are forced to hire armies of workers to manually pollinate their crops during flowering season. Artificial pollination technologies have been developed, small drones equipped with brushes that try to mimic bee work, but they are inefficient, expensive, and incapable of replicating the precision and efficiency of billions of years of evolution. Some countries have attempted large-scale artificial pollination programs, but costs are astronomical and results mediocre. Global agricultural productivity has fallen by half, contributing to food crises and political instability in already vulnerable regions. Scientists work desperately to resurrect bee populations through captive breeding programs and genetic engineering, but discover that reintroducing bees into already degraded ecosystems is like trying to replant a forest in soil that has lost all its fertility. The cruel irony is that we realize too late what was always before our eyes. Economists finally calculated the real value of services provided by bees and discovered they were much more valuable than we ever imagined. But this understanding came too late to prevent collapse. Natural history museums create exhibitions about the age of bees, silent halls where children can see preserved specimens of these extraordinary creatures and hear recordings of their hums, like ghostly echoes of a richer and more vibrant world their grandparents knew. And on quiet nights when wind whispers through silent gardens, some people swear they can still hear the ghost of bee hum, a haunting reminder of what was once the soundtrack of abundance on Earth. Can you imagine this world, my dear listener? Can you feel the emptiness, the silence, the impoverished simplicity of a planet without its small winged gardeners? It's a future we can still avoid, but only if we act with urgency and determination. What a heavy and precious responsibility we carry in our hands, the ability to preserve or destroy one of the oldest and most vital partnerships in the history of life on Earth. But now, my dear companion of this nighttime journey, I want us to set aside for a moment the shadows of that possible future and turn our attention to the rays of light that still shine in the present. Because where there's understanding, there's hope. And where there's hope, there's possibility for transformative action. Around the world, ordinary people are discovering they have the power to make a difference in bee lives. Great heroic gestures or extraordinary resources aren't necessary. Sometimes, the simplest acts are those that create the deepest waves of change. Imagine a child planting her first sunflower seeds in a small pot on her apartment window. She doesn't know she's creating a refueling station for urban bees. She simply wants to see something beautiful grow. But when that sunflower blooms and attracts its first bee visitor, something magical happens. A connection forms, a link in the great chain of life strengthens. In cities around the world, green guerrilla movements are transforming vacant lots into wildflower gardens. People organize in groups to plant native species in abandoned flower beds, creating pollen corridors that allow bees to travel through urban landscapes that were once floral deserts. Urban beekeepers are installing hives on building rooftops, discovering that urban bees often thrive better than their rural counterparts due to greater plant diversity in home gardens compared to agricultural monocultures. Schools around the world are creating bee gardens, where children can directly observe the importance of pollinators. These children grow up with a visceral understanding of life's interconnection that previous generations had to learn intellectually. Did you know that even seemingly small choices in your daily life can have significant impacts for bees? When you choose to buy honey from local producers instead of industrially processed honey, you're supporting beekeepers who maintain sustainable practices. When you opt for organic products, you're reducing demand for pesticides that harm bees. Home gardeners are rediscovering the value of native plants and wildflowers. Instead of uniform lawns that offer no resources for pollinators, they're creating clover lawns and lazy gardens full of plants that bloom in sequence throughout the entire growing season. The technique is surprisingly simple. Choose plants that bloom at different times of year to ensure there's always something flowering for bees. Crocuses and willows in early spring, lavender and cosmos in summer, asters and chrysanthemums in fall. Farmers are also rediscovering agricultural practices that benefit bees. Regenerative agriculture, which emphasizes crop diversity and soil health, is proving to be not only better for bees but also more profitable long-term due to the natural pollination services it attracts. Some farmers are creating flower strips along the edges of their fields, corridors of flowering plants, that serve as habitat for bees and other pollinators. These strips not only support bees, but also attract beneficial insects that naturally control pests, reducing the need for pesticides. Innovative technologies are also being developed to support bee populations. Smart sensors can remotely monitor hive health, alerting beekeepers to problems before they become critical. Mobile apps allow citizen scientists to report bee sightings, helping scientists track populations and movement patterns. Public policies are changing in response to growing awareness about pollinator importance. Some countries have banned certain pesticides harmful to bees. Cities are modifying park maintenance practices to be more pollinator-friendly. Government programs offer incentives for farmers who adopt bee-friendly practices. But perhaps the most important change is happening in human consciousness. People are beginning to see bees not as annoying insects but as essential partners in maintaining life. They're learning to appreciate bee hum as background music of environmental health. And you, my dear listener, what small or large actions could you take to support these extraordinary creatures? Perhaps planting a variety of flowers in your garden or balcony. Perhaps supporting organizations that work to protect pollinator habitats. Perhaps simply sharing what you learned today with friends and family. Remember, each flower planted, each pesticide avoided, each person educated about bee importance is a seed of hope cast into the future. And just as bees multiply life through their pollination, our individual actions can multiply through their consequences, creating waves of positive change that spread far beyond what we can see. The question isn't whether we can save the bees, it's whether we will choose to do so. And that choice, my friend, is in our hands. Now, as our journey deepens even further, I invite you to consider something that goes beyond ecology, beyond economics, beyond even survival. I invite you to explore the spiritual and philosophical dimension of our relationship with bees. There's something deeply sacred about the way bees live their lives. They teach us lessons about community, purpose, and interdependence that transcend the realm of biology and touch fundamental questions about how we should live on this planet. Think about the absolute dedication of a worker bee. She never questions her role, never hesitates in her work, never acts for self-interest at the colony's expense. Her entire life is an act of service, not forced or coerced, but flowing naturally from her own nature. It's as if she intuitively understands a truth we humans often forget, that individual well-being and collective well-being are not opposites, but complementary aspects of the same greater reality. In many ancient spiritual traditions, bees were seen as messengers between worlds, connecting earth to sky, material to spiritual, known to mystery. Ancient Egyptians believed bees were born from the tears of the sun god Ra, and that honey was food of the gods. Greeks associated bees with the goddess Demeter and saw beekeeping as a sacred art. Have you ever wondered why such diverse cultures, separated by vast geographical and temporal distances, develop similar reverence for bees? Perhaps it's because bees embody qualities we recognize as spiritual ideals: harmonious cooperation, work that benefits not just oneself but the entire ecosystem, and a way of life that's perfectly aligned with the natural rhythms of the world. The hive can be seen as a living metaphor for how healthy societies can function. There's no rigid hierarchy based on power or privilege, but an emergent organization based on need and capacity. Each bee contributes according to her abilities and receives according to her needs. Conflicts are rare because everyone shares a common goal: the prosperity of the entire community. And what about the way bees relate to the world around them? They don't extract resources from the environment destructively, but participate in exchanges that enrich the entire system. When a bee collects nectar, she doesn't impoverish the flower, she helps it reproduce. It's a model of economy based on mutual abundance instead of competitive scarcity. Bees also teach us about the importance of living in the present. A forager bee doesn't worry about flowers she visited yesterday or ones she might visit tomorrow. She's completely present in the flower she's visiting right now, extracting from it everything it has to offer, giving in return everything she has to give. There's a meditative quality to bee hum that many people find deeply calming. It's a sound that connects us to something primitive and timeless, the constant whisper of life renewing itself, proliferating, celebrating itself. In a world full of artificial noise and electronic distractions, bee hum reminds us of a simpler and more natural way of being in the world. The temporality of bee life also offers profound lessons. A worker bee lives only a few weeks during the active season, but in that brief time she contributes to something much larger and more enduring than her individual existence. She participates in maintaining ecosystems that have existed for millions of years and, if we have wisdom, will continue existing for millions more. This invites us to reflect on our own mortality and legacy. What kind of contribution are we making to the world during our limited time here? Are we living in a way that enriches the great fabric of life, or are we simply consuming resources without giving anything in return? Bees also teach us about resilience and adaptability. Over millions of years, they've survived ice ages, mass extinctions, and dramatic climate changes. They did this not through domination or control, but through cooperation, flexibility, and deep alignment with natural processes. When we face crises in our own lives, whether personal, social, or environmental, we could learn from bee wisdom. Instead of trying to control or dominate difficult situations, we could seek ways to cooperate, adapt, and find our harmonious place within larger systems. Bee language, their complex dance that communicates direction, distance, and resource quality, also offers insights about authentic communication. When a bee dances to communicate the location of a nectar source, she's sharing vital information precisely and generously, without seeking personal advantage or manipulating other bees. What would our human society be like if we communicated with the same authenticity and generosity? If we shared information for collective benefit instead of using communication as a tool of power or manipulation, and consider the way bees build their architecture. Hexagonal combs are not just functionally perfect, they're also beautiful. Bees show us that efficiency and beauty are not opposites, but aspects of the same profound truth. When something is perfectly aligned with its natural function, it naturally becomes beautiful. This suggests an approach to human life where we seek alignment between our deepest values and our daily actions. When we live according to our most authentic nature, when we contribute to the well-being of the larger whole of which we're part, our lives naturally become more beautiful and meaningful. Bees also teach us about the importance of cycles and seasonality. They don't try to maintain the same level of activity throughout the year. In winter, they slow down, conserve energy, and prepare for spring's rebirth. They honor natural rhythms instead of trying to transcend or ignore them. In our modern societies, we often try to maintain the same frantic pace throughout the year, ignoring our natural needs for rest, reflection, and renewal. These remind us of the wisdom of honoring cycles, of work and rest, activity and contemplation, growth and consolidation. Finally, these invite us to consider our responsibility as the dominant species on the planet. They show us it's possible to be prosperous without being destructive, productive without being exploitative, successful without harming the well-being of other species. If such a small creature can have such a profoundly positive impact on the world, what responsibility do we have with our intelligence, technology, and power to use these capabilities to nurture and protect life in all its forms? Reconnection with bees is ultimately a reconnection with our own deeper nature, our capacity to cooperate, to contribute, to create abundance through our actions. It's a reminder that we're part of something much larger than our individual lives, and that our deepest fulfillment comes from serving that something larger. As our contemplative journey approaches its end, I want to invite you to imagine with me what a world could look like where humans and bees live in harmonious partnership, a future where we apply the lessons we've learned and create a truly sustainable and prosperous civilization. Imagine future cities designed like three-dimensional gardens, skyscrapers with living walls covered in flowering plants that change with seasons. Green roofs that are not just decorative, but function as aerial corridors for pollinators. Urban parks that are not just spaces for human recreation, but functional ecosystems that support abundant biodiversity. In these future cities, beehives are integrated into urban architecture as functional and aesthetic elements. They're monitored by smart sensors that alert about bee population health in real time. Children grow up seeing and hearing bees daily, developing an intuitive understanding of their importance for life. Agriculture has completely transformed. Instead of vast monocultures that are deserts for wildlife, farms have become diverse mosaics of crops interspersed with natural habitats. Farmers work as partners with bees and other pollinators, creating agricultural systems that are both productive and regenerative. Advanced technologies are used not to replace bees but to support them. Artificial intelligence monitors flowering patterns and bee movement to optimize planting of crops and wild plants. Drones don't replace bees in pollination, but are used to plant wildflower seeds in degraded areas, creating new habitats for pollinators. The global economy has restructured to appropriately value ecosystem services. Farmers receive payments not just for food production, but for maintaining pollinator habitats. Companies are evaluated not just by their financial profits, but by their contribution to ecological health. Educational systems have incorporated ecology and natural systems as core subjects. All children learn about interdependence, natural cycles, and their responsibility as participants in the great fabric of life. They grow up with a visceral understanding that human prosperity and ecological health are inseparable. Scientific research has expanded to include not just physical and technological sciences, but also traditional wisdom and indigenous knowledge about living in harmony with natural systems. Scientists work side by side with indigenous peoples, traditional beekeepers, and experienced gardeners to develop practices that benefit both humans and bees. Medicine has integrated bee-pollinated plants not just as sources of nutritious foods, but as essential elements of holistic healing systems. Therapeutic gardens full of flowering plants have become standard components of hospitals and mental health clinics. Human spirituality and philosophy have evolved to incorporate a deep understanding of our interdependence with other species. Rituals and celebrations honor seasonal cycles of flowering and bee activity. Bee hum is recognized as a form of sacred music, the soundtrack of life continuously renewing itself. Art and literature celebrate the beauty and importance of pollinators. Poets write about bee dance, musicians compose symphonies inspired by their hum, architects design buildings that mimic the perfect geometry of combs. Governments around the world have ratified international pollinator protection treaties, recognizing that bees are humanity's common heritage. Habitat corridors connect entire countries, allowing bee populations to migrate and mix freely across political borders. Climate change has been addressed not just through clean energy technologies, but through massive restoration of ecosystems rich in flowering plants. Billions of fruit trees and flowering shrubs have been planted, creating carbon sinks that are also thriving habitats for pollinators. Individuals have developed daily practices of connection with bees and nature. Morning meditations include time to observe and thank pollinators. Home gardens are designed as small sanctuaries for bees. Consumer choices are made consciously to support pollinator-friendly agricultural systems. Can you see yourself living in this future world? Can you imagine waking up each morning knowing your daily actions contribute to the prosperity of life systems that sustain the entire planet? Can you feel the deep satisfaction that would come from knowing you're part of a civilization that has learned to live in harmonious partnership with the natural world? This future is not a distant fantasy, it's a real possibility that can begin to manifest through our choices today. Each flower we plant, each pesticide we choose not to use, each person we educate about bee importance is a step toward this prosperous and sustainable future. The seeds of this future garden are already being planted by people like you, who understand that our species' health is intimately connected to the health of all other species with whom we share this extraordinary planet. And so, my dear companion of this nighttime journey, we arrive at the end of our exploration, though it's better to say we arrive at the beginning of a new understanding. Because true journeys of discovery never really end. They simply open our minds and hearts to see the familiar world with transformed eyes. When you leave from wherever you are now, whether from your bed, your favorite armchair, or wherever this narrative found you, you'll carry with you a new awareness. Bee hum will never again be just background sound. It will be a message, a reminder, a blessing. Every garden you pass will become a window for understanding the complex network of relationships that sustains life. Every flower will be seen not just as decorative beauty, but as a cosmic service station where bees refuel to continue their sacred work of keeping the world alive. You now know that bees are much more than honey producers. They are architects of abundance, engineers of balance, guardians of ancient secrets about how to live in harmony with Earth's rhythms. They are silent teachers who show us that cooperation is more powerful than competition, that serving the greater good is the path to true prosperity. You now understand that your own existence is intertwined with theirs in ways that go far beyond what you ever imagined. The food on your table, the oxygen you breathe, the diversity of life that enriches your world, all of this exists because small golden creatures work tirelessly, without recognition, keeping life cycles running smoothly. And you also now carry the weight and privilege of responsibility. Because once we know, we can no longer claim ignorance. Once we understand our connections with the natural world, we're called to act as conscious guardians instead of unconscious consumers. But this responsibility doesn't need to be a heavy burden. As bees themselves teach us, when we live aligned with our natural purpose, when our individual actions automatically serve the well-being of the whole, life becomes lighter, more joyful, more meaningful. Perhaps you'll plant flowers in your garden or in a window box or in a community bed. Perhaps you'll choose products that support sustainable agriculture. Perhaps you'll share what you've learned with other people, planting seeds of consciousness that can bloom into actions of protection and care. Or perhaps your contribution will be more subtle, a change in how you see and relate to the natural world, an increase in reverence and gratitude for life systems of which you're part, a deeper understanding that you're not separate from nature, but are an expression of it. Each breath you take connects you to the great oxygen cycle maintained by plants that were pollinated. Each meal you eat connects you to the web of life that begins with healthy soil, passes through flowering plants and working bees, and arrives at your table loaded with nutrition and life. You now know there's no true separation between your prosperity and bee prosperity, between your health and ecosystem health, between your well-being and the well-being of the planet as a whole. We're all part of one immense cosmic organism, where each part depends on all others to thrive. When you observe bees working in flowers, remember you're witnessing one of the oldest and most vital partnerships in the history of life on Earth, a partnership that preceded humanity by millions of years, and that, if we have wisdom, will continue for millions of years after we're just a memory in the long evolutionary history of the planet. And also remember that you have the power to be part of this partnership. Through your choices, your actions, your expanded consciousness, you can contribute to maintaining this ancient dance between bees and flowers, this symphony of life on which we all depend. Bees have taught us we don't need to be big to have an immense impact. A creature that weighs less than a paper clip can sustain entire ecosystems. Imagine then what you, with your intelligence, creativity, and capacity for conscious choice, can contribute to life's flourishing. Bee hum is the sound of hope constantly renewing itself. It's life's whisper saying, yes, it's possible. Yes, it's worth it. Yes, we can create abundance through collaboration. Yes, we can prosper without destroying. Yes, there's a path to harmony. And now, my dear friend, as our journey together comes to an end, I want to thank you for your company in this exploration, for opening your mind and heart to understand these extraordinary creatures, for allowing this understanding to touch and perhaps transform your relationship with the world. Bees will continue their sacred work as they have for millions of years. They'll continue dancing from flower to flower, weaving life's tapestry with each flight, keeping the world alive with each pollination. And you are now part of this cosmic dance, not as a passive observer, but as a conscious participant. You carry within you the seeds of understanding that can bloom into actions that nurture and protect these silent guardians of our existence. As the gentle silence of night returns around you, I invite you to one final reflection. If you knew that your actions today would determine whether future generations grow up in a world rich with bee hum or on a silent planet where only echoes remain, what choices would you make right now to honor these small guardians of life?